Hey, good morning, everybody. My name is Marshall Richardson, and this is my customer focused culture video. We're going to be relating it to the organization that I'm in now, which is the Army, and then tying it into some of the medical organizations that I worked for. So, just looking at the Army from a perspective of customers and employees. Employees would be obviously the soldiers and some of the citizens and contractors that work for the Army. And then the customers are citizens of the nation and any international partners. So mostly the service that's being offered by our organization is to protect the nation, offering some professional career paths, being role models, and then obviously being model citizens. It's a pretty cut and dry service that we offer. But in order to deliver that service, obviously we have to be able to recruit and retain professionals who are selfless, high caliber humans, but they also need to be well taken care of if they're going to deliver that service. So right now, my current organization's culture, they ground it on these pillars that they call leadership, LDR, SHIP, which is leadership, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. Of recent years, the organization has become a lot more inclusive and open-minded than it has in previous years. It's also become a lot more employee focused and less customer focused in the last couple decades. And this is really due to the lack of an actual conflict or war to fight. Historically, our organization has really been at its peak for service to the nation when there's been conflicts or times of war. However, since the focus lately has shifted more to taking care of those stateside, the employees stateside, and then big focus has been pushed on trying to remove the toxic leadership culture that many feel still exists in our organization. And that's been a move that they've tried to make to try and push so that they can get back to the focus of on the customers. In terms of our medical facilities, the focus, it's always been on the customers, like the patients and soldiers that come through, but it's somewhat been in the wrong way depending on the organization, the medical facility that you go into and look at. A lot of the emphasis is placed on volume and rapid diagnosis, kind of the Tylenol water, return to duty, and a lot less focused on values. I can't say I know just how the reimbursement method is and whether that plays a part for some of these military facilities, but even for the providers that are there that are not military, or maybe they retired and they were prior service, or they are military currently, they still do have that focus of, hey, get them in, get them out. We got to move on to the next ones. It doesn't take that long. Actually, it's some of the military dental offices that have a much greater customer-driven culture than the medical facilities do. The dental offices, they tend to focus a lot more on resolving the issues and creating a desired outcome for the patient and provider for what they both want, and trying to do it in as few encounters as they can. So it's really something that a lot of the facilities should be trying to emulate. In terms of some of the drivers of customer satisfaction, I think it's first important that we understand that customer satisfaction is not a concrete and cut and dry concept. It's really dynamic and relative to the person and what's important to them and the organization and the service that they provide. I mean, that's going to drive what matters for customer satisfaction. And then the organization obviously has to have satisfied employees before it can really fully commit to giving that customer satisfaction. If you've got unhappy employees, and you really have a hard time trying to convince them that the ones that walk through the door are more important. So you really got to make sure the employees are set themselves. Typical businesses, most organizations out there, not looking at the Army in this case, they have a lot of very similar drivers that influence their customer happiness. You're talking things like timely service, high quality service, getting that personalized care, so it's really tailored to each individual that walks through the door and not just a blanket care statement, getting some attention to detail and having their needs catered to, getting feedback solicited so that way they can give their input on how people are doing, how the organization is doing. You'll find a lot of those are very similar to a lot of organizations. That's the same thing for medical facilities. In terms of the military, ours is a little different as a whole organization. Like I said, the service we provide is protection for the nation against foreign and domestic threats, and then a lot of the secondary services like job opportunities, career training, contract opportunities, civil response for things like natural disasters. So for the nation to really be satisfied for the service that we provide, there must be both concrete proof and perceived understanding that our organization has the ability to do the job that we say. When I say concrete proof, that can be things like doing demonstrations through recruiting events, like when they're showing off the F-22 Raptors doing runs on the runway, or when they're doing recruiting events, like when they go to football games and they're pulling their artillery cannons for touchdowns, things like that. Perceived understanding, obviously things that are less concrete, but it just gives the illusion when you ask the general person, do they think that the organization, the Army, can do the service that it says it can? They'll start to think about things that they've seen on TV or perceptions that they have or hearsay, like do they have the manpower, the technology? Do I feel like they have the expertise? Have people that I've talked to lately shown that? So that's what's perceived. It's not fully demonstrated, but it's just perceived, and that plays a part in customer satisfaction as well. Some of the other drivers that I believe are help with customer satisfaction for our organization, the ability for us to develop or demonstrate professionalism, and that's in any interaction, whether it's convoys on the highway, talking to high schools, talking to each other, interactions like that. Obviously, anything seen on television or YouTube as well. Displaying compassion for the oppressed. A lot of the media that are overseas are obviously going to be recording what's going on, so there's not a lot of hiding. So it's important to make sure that the compassion for the oppressed and those that are not even our customer base are shown. That way they still get that perceived understanding. Exemplifying commitment to excelling in any area of study. Obviously, our organization is filled with anything that's civilian side. The Army has it as well. So whether that's construction, mortician, medical, law, just being able to demonstrate that you are a master of your field, that's going to do a lot for letting the customer know that we can do the job that we say, and they're satisfied with it. And then obviously just being soldiers, showing that mental and physical toughness and the selflessness required to be a service member. But obviously changes need to be made. We need to bring the focus back to the customer. We've got a lot of focus on our employees right now. We do need it, but we have to make sure that we're able to take care of our customers, the nation, especially when you consider the size of a change that needs to be made on something that's at this strategic level. It's definitely going to need to be a multi-step approach. And some of these changes I'm going to list, they can apply to both the military as a whole and then the military medical organizations that I've had the pleasure of being a part of. And my changes I would propose, number one would be recruiting. I would look at a much more thorough investigation process prior to enlistment or hiring of new candidates or employees, just to determine if they are suitable. We obviously go through background checks right now, but there's not as in-depth a process. It's mostly just looking at, are you high school educated, and do you have any criminal records or medical issues? But I think it should be more than that, obviously with some of the mental issues that folks have coming in and leaving. So I think it's important that we make sure that we do a really deep dive on, is this someone that we can trust to hold a weapon, hold a stethoscope, hold a surgical instrument, and be trusted to do the job that they say with very little supervision. And that could be things like interviews with peers, personality assessments, background checks, things like that. Looking at the new hires or new trainees, the ones that are already onboarded, this could be things like looking at a lot of the metrics that are in place already. Just saying, making sure that they're very transparent, make it known from the beginning what needs done. What are the standards for you to stay employed in this organization? Make that very clear from the get-go. And then what are the metrics that need to be met if you want to excel and start looking at promotion? Once people have that, once employees have that through the jump, there's no chance for surprises. They know exactly what their chances are of getting promoted, what they need to do to get promoted, and that's going to drive some of their motivation. I also want to look at things like health and wellness. We all could use taking care of our employees' health and wellness. We can't just look at their ability to do their job. If they want to do their job well, they need to make sure that their home life, school life, personal life, and work life are all taken care of. That includes mental and physical. So I would look at having walk-in physical therapy clinics and nutritionists and dietitians available by phone in order to promote that health and wellness, making sure we're doing employee satisfaction days whether that's, having lunch with the boss, bring your dog to work day, bring your kids to school or your kids to work day, things like that. And then also, this may be somewhat controversial, but having periodic mental health checks or supervisor check-ins with the employees just to see how they're doing, just to check on their home and work life. A lot of folks are going through a lot of trials and tribulations that they may not explain to their boss. So I do think it's important that we have that discussion periodically while they're having their time of employment here. One thing with leaders, I think it's really important, is to change the way that leadership evaluations are done. That's for both the Army and medical facilities. Instead of just looking at meeting metrics, while that's great, and that is the standard and the bare minimum, we need to make sure that the organization has trust in those leaderships positions, and then the supervisors of those leaders also have trust in them as well. There are a lot of things that are abstract that need to be assessed for leaders. And that's one of the reasons why toxic leadership is spread, is because those abstract things are not being assessed. And I think in order to change this, it would take a top-down and bottom-up feedback system. That way the leadership evaluations, they're top-down, so that way supervisors of the leaders can look at, are they meeting those metrics? Are they meeting those goals, those strategic goals, in order for the organization to continue to advance? And then bottom up, you'll give feedback. Are they still displaying ideal qualities of a leader? Are they treating their subordinates, in a polite, respectful way? Are they offering mentorship? Are they offering feedback? Are they offering guidance? Are they teaching? Are they, closed door, don't talk to me, doing things behind everyone's back, but, meeting their boss's needs kind of leadership. So I think a change in that aspect would be good. That'll help the employees feel satisfied, which will in turn lead to customer satisfaction. And then one big thing for me, especially for the medical facilities, would be soliciting feedback for the customers. There are some medical facilities, and not all do this, but all should. They need to offer satisfaction feedback to each and every employee or customer encounter. That way, every time you go through the door, whether it's a primary care checkup, whether it's a lab draw, whether it's a dental appointment, getting a cleaning, getting a filling, whether it's surgery, whatever the case is, there should always be a feedback, whether email, text, phone call, however we need to deliver it, just to get feedback on how did that encounter go? Were their needs met? Were they met with courtesy, politeness? Did they meet our standards in terms of an organization? If they were not met, obviously, there was a hiccup somewhere. Maybe someone had a bad day, those one-offs, or maybe there's a systemic issue going on where we need to look at it. And having that feedback, more feedback is more information. More information, at least you can, filter out what, is less important and look at what is important. That's a lot better than having feedback every few customers. Obviously that's not going to give you as much information to deal with. Looking at some of the costs associated in making these changes, obviously all of these would require a hefty cost, both time-wise and financially. Looking at a more thorough investigation process, we're talking, contracts with, physical therapists, reformatting our evaluation systems, both digitally and by paper, if that's the case. Potentially contracting mental health providers for the organization for those check-ins, dedicating time to receive and process feedback at every level from those solicitation attempts with every encounter. That's going to take a tremendous amount of time and money and personnel just to be able to both look at what it takes to research, get a good system in place, and then begin the implementation. Because of these changes, it's definitely going to require, like I said, a lot of heavy funding just to begin, but not only begin, but to sustain that. You're talking, when you introduce a new system, especially a new digital system, when we talk about evaluations for leaders, I believe that both digital, it makes a system of record that can't necessarily be forgotten. It can be backed up. And then paper as a double backup. That's going to take definitely a couple super users and teachers and, IT folks to try and get that system brought in and implemented. And that's going to need to be budgeted. In order to budget a lot of these changes, that means we're going to have to try and pull funds from some of the projects that are currently running. But that's one of the costs of doing business. Obviously, if an organization truly wants to commit to its customers and deliver excellent service, you're going to have to weigh the benefits between what you've been doing with what you should be doing. Are they lining up, or do you need to, change where you're allotting funds so that you can make these changes and re-implement a focus on, customer satisfaction? In terms of implementation, how I would implement it, and then how I would know if it's working, I think there would need to be a couple committees and possibly review boards just to try and get this implementation to be done successfully. You're talking getting committees that can equally represent all components and types of personnel in the organization. That way, everyone's got a fair say. Making sure those committee representatives are, getting feedback from those that they're representing in terms of these systems. Going back to the general populace of the organization, saying, "Hey, we want to implement this plan. What are your initial thoughts?" So I can take it to the committee, and then that committee member can bring it to the committee and let everyone know this is how the field feels about it. That way, the committee can, use that information and make the appropriate decisions on how they should implement or tweak things. Just talking about that leadership evaluation system, that's something that can be an immediate change to implement. We're talking something digitally. Obviously, it's going to take time to get the system in place and get folks trained on it. But the standards can obviously be introduced very quickly with a couple briefs, just letting the leadership and the general population of employees know. That way, everyone knows that the top down, bottom up is going to be with the intent to make the customers and the employees both satisfied. And leaders, it's their job entirely to make sure that that happens, not just meeting the metrics of the organization, but meeting the needs of the employees as well. That way, the employees can be successful. And then the feedback system, that's obviously going to be progressive, a little more of a slow implementation. We're going to have to look at a system of how we can get that feedback solicitation to all of our customers every time they have an encounter, or in terms of the Army, how can we get that feedback out to the general population? Obviously, you can do things like, mailing out surveys, emailing out surveys to current service members, contractors, things like that. It would take some time to get all that information sorted, but it would at least be a good start to get it going. And then you can look at the boards and the committee members to try and sort and filter through that information and figure out, is the organization doing a great job right now, or are they not? Then knowing if that change is effective, obviously, like I said, looking at the feedback, is it generally positive? Is it overwhelmingly negative? Is it somewhere in the middle? What are people saying on each side? Is there something that's a significant trend that needs to be looked at in terms of the feedback? And obviously, just the same with the Army as a medical organization, looking at turnover rate. When we make these changes for the leadership, is it going to change the turnover rate? Is it going to lower it, keep it steady, or even raise it potentially? When you have a high turnover rate, that says obviously your employees are generally not happy, and that's going to affect your customer satisfaction as well. So really, if you can try and get that turnover rate to be relatively lower, you're going to have a much better chance of promoting the customers being the sole focus. When your employees are happy where they work, they're not having a lot of issues, then you can really shift the focus back to the customers. My name is Marshall Richardson, and this, like I said, is my video on delivering customer-focused service excellence.